So we are starting chapter 88, halacha number 1. Again, and the laws of Muktzah, things that are not allowed to be handled on Shabbos. Halacha number 1. Muktzah midas, something which is set aside in your head. The hainu sheikh so adam midaite mila'achlei b'Shabbos. A person, in his mind, he decided he's not going to eat it. So again, we're going to have this word Muktzah. We're going to have it thrown around a lot here in the halacha also. The word Muktzah means set aside. That's what it literally means. So the first thing we're talking about is something which is set aside in your mind. You're not going to eat it on Shabbos. Why? It is something which is only fit to be eaten in a pressing situation. So the food item, but usually you wouldn't be eating it. Or it's normal food, it's average food. But you in your mind set it aside to sell, not to eat. Even though you took that food that you're going to sell and put it into storage, into your store area. And a third category, something which is not fit for human consumption, but is fit for animal consumption. Even though on Friday, when Shabbos began, it was not fit for animal food. How does that happen? How is something not fit on Friday and is fit on Shabbos? You had a bird, you had an animal that died on Shabbos. So before Shabbos, it was potential human food. Now it died. It's not kosher, obviously. It was slaughtered, so it's animal food. Or something which was changed today from what it was yesterday. It's not talking about food anymore. We're talking about items, utensils, which they are not what they were yesterday, but they are fit for some use. What does that mean? You're going, for example, you have a utensil that broke on Shabbos, but could still be used for a form of their original use. The kabel behem ezel meichel mashka, for example, you had a big bowl, a serving bowl that broke, but you still have that piece. The piece you could still use it to eat out of. So it's not the same status as it was when Shabbos began, but it still has a use. Or you had bones that were stripped of their meat. You're eating meat and you have the bone left over. And these bones, so if they're garbage, they're garbage. Talking about if that's perhaps not, they're dog food. You want to serve them to your dog. So when Shabbos began, it was a steak. It was human food with a bone attached. Now it's just animal food. We just gave a whole bunch of categories, a whole bunch of scenarios. Kol elu mutar mutatel b'Shabbos. All these are not muktzah. All of these are allowed to be handled on Shabbos. All of these, so each example he gave had something which might throw you off, right? It had some detail in the scenario which might ignite a red light. Might say it will be an issue, but the Ketubah is telling us no, they're all fine because they still have a use, so they're still edible for human, for animal. Since they are still usable on Shabbos, they are not muktzah. They could be handled on Shabbos. Chutz, the only example which would not work like this is mima shedacha b'yadayim. Certain times you take food and you reject it with your hand. You purposely reject it. You're putting it away. You're not using it. If you're going with simukim, for example, back in the days, you wanted raisins, you wanted dates, dried dates. You weren't just buying them in the store, obviously. You were putting them on your roof. And for those, I don't know how long it takes. Haven't ever tried this, but for those few weeks, whatever it is, it wasn't edible. It was in the middle of the process of drying. So in that scenario, you're taking these dates, taking these grapes, you're putting them on your roof. You are purposely rejecting them. I'm not touching these things for the next 2 weeks. But that is, in that scenario, it would be Muktzah. In all the scenarios that they brought before, in which they have some sort of use on Shabbos, and not the normal use or not the previous use, they have some sort of usefulness on Shabbos, that's fine. But if you went and specifically rejected these items, then it is forbidden to use on Shabbos, for the handle on Shabbos. All right, so again, the idea we have from here that something which is somewhat useful on Shabbos could be handled. Halacha number 2. Dvarim she'enim ru'uyim klal achilas adam, k'may she'hein. Things, objects, food items, which are not fit for human consumption as they are, afilu al yedei atchak, even if it's a pressing situation. Shetzrichim bishul, they need to be cooked. Even though it might be fit for animal consumption. Raw meat would be a perfect example. Raw meat is not fit for human consumption. It doesn't matter how hungry you are. I hope none of us are going and taking a bite out of a raw steak. However, it is animal food. But still, but since in your head you're not giving your steak to your dog, you're eating your steak. Steak's for you. And for you, you can't eat it now. So they're not, in the previous halacha, we're discussing things which are an animal which died, it's not kosher, it's only for animals. You can only use it as a dog food. Over here, this steak is yours. You don't want to give your steak to your dog. And for you, you can't eat it today because it's raw. So another scenario, or items which on Shabbos are not fit for any use. Going eitzim, benoitzes, shaloifim, such as wood, or bird feathers, behema, or animal hides, bitsema, or pishton, or wool, or flax. V'chol balei any animal. Afilu shehem b'seich beisa, even they're in your house, your pet. V'klipe egoizim, v'klipe beitzim, and nutshells and eggshells. V'atzamis koshes and hard bones. She'ein ru'uyis afilu klavim, is even too hard for a dog. V'dlasis v'chalonis habayis, as well as doors and windows of a house that became disconnected. Also, the place on the Shabbos, as we learned, you can't install a window or a door on Shabbos. We had a discussion about that in chapter 80. Or a utensil which broke and the pieces are not fit for any use. So kol elav adoim lahem asur metiltul. So all these examples. So again, he's trying to give you the general rule. All the examples he gave over here are something which you can't use today. There's nothing to do with it on Shabbos. You can't wool and flax. You can't make clothes out of it on Shabbos. You can't install your door or your window on Shabbos. You can't cook your raw meat on Shabbos. All these things have no use today. If they have no use, they can't be handled either. Asur Matilda, they can't handle it. When we call makim, however, please chuchish and nishtabu makim shecholim lahazik. Shmuel will be happy to hear this one. How about you have a glass cup, and your child grabbed it off the counter, and it's shattered into 1,000 pieces. So based on what we just said, these pieces are not fit for anything. They're muktzah. You can't handle them, right? However, if they're in a place where they can cause injury, mutalafanas hashvar, you're allowed to clean it up. The rabbis, again, muktzah is a rabbinic decree. It's good whoever has kids, young kids. Muktzah is a rabbinic decree, right? A rabbinic decree, they made the rules when yes, when no. They said muktzah in general, so certain items cannot be handled on Shabbos. If there is a threat of injury, the rabbi said it will be fine. All right, so again, halacha number 1, we were taught that something could be used on Shabbos, even if it's not the original way, even if it's not the best way, it's not muktzah, could be handled. So, in halacha 2, we learned that if something cannot be used on Shabbos, it has no purpose today. It has a purpose on the weekday, but today there is nothing to do with this. We gave scenarios how that would apply. It cannot be handled on Shabbos. How is that practical? So again, something breaks. That's one way it's practical. If you open your freezer to take out ice cream, and a nice chunk of steak falls out, it's muktzah. You can't move that on Shabbos. It could be your fridge also, but if raw meat can't be handled on Shabbos, broken utensils can't be handled on Shabbos. These are pretty practical, and people don't even realize what I mean. It's food. I'm taking it from my freezer. It's a nice, some beautifully wrapped steak, but on Shabbos that would be muktzah. Can't handle it. All right. Halacha number 3. Michael shu aser b'achila mutar ba'ana. Let's go to less common scenarios. Food which cannot be eaten, but you could have benefit from it. Shmuel, did you learn smicha with my father? Shmuel, you didn't? So you started smicha, right? So smicha is about basar b'chalav, right? The bulk of it is about milk and meat.
Yeah.
So you learn machalakim. But you'll get to basar b'chalav at some point.
No, I did basar. I'm doing now.
So the special rule of basar, if you somehow get a can of pork in your possession, or a nice McDonald's sandwich, you could sell it, you could gift it to somebody. You're allowed to have benefit off it, monetary benefit. If, however, you're cooking meat and your child pours a bottle of milk inside, or you pour a bottle of milk inside, now you have basar b'chalav, your milk and meat together. You can't even have benefit from it. You can't sell it. You can't gift it to a non-Jew, etc. You can't give it to your pet to eat. So that's a special rule. In general, most non-kosher foods or forbidden foods you're not allowed to eat, but you're allowed to derive benefit in other ways. So we're discussing that the more common scenario. You have a pork sandwich, a McDonald's sandwich sitting in your house on Shabbos for whatever reason. So you're allowed to have benefit. You can't eat it. You can derive benefit from it. It's a McDonald's sandwich. The non-Jew could eat it as is. You're going cooked meat. It's a nice hamburger. Nice cheeseburger. Cheeseburger, why is cheeseburger not basar b'chalav, Isidore?
Cheeseburger's nevela, first of all.
Nevela, it's true.
So you if it's not it, but it's, I guess it is.
Actually would be probably.
It is a behemoth. It could be.
Sure. It will make it a hamburger made out of ham with cheese.
Oh well, but it's not it's not a kosher animal. It's not.
Right. So you have this non-kosher sandwich sitting there. It's fit to eat right away. And you could give it to a non-Jew because it belongs to you. You have the ability to gift it to a non-Jew. So mutal l'taltla, you are allowed to handle it, because even though you can't eat it, you could benefit from it. You could gift it. However, if this non-kosher food cannot be eaten by a non-Jew as is, you're going basar chai, like raw meat. You went shopping in your local supermarket, and instead of going to the kosher section, you by mistake bought raw meat. It's in the raw, not kosher meat. Put it in your fridge. So you can't. The non-Jew can't eat it as is. He has to cook it. It's not pet food either. Because it's human food. It's human food for a non-Jew. Or for some reason you have someone else's non-kosher meat sitting in your house. Your neighbor said, my fridge is full. I'm having a party. Can I leave some meat in your fridge? Sure, wrap it up, write your name on it so I won't eat it, and put it in there. Now on Shabbos, you're trying to make room in your fridge for your Shabbos meal leftovers. And there's this pile of meat sitting there, non-kosher meat. So you can't eat it. It's not fit for you to eat. And you can't gift it either because it doesn't belong to you. It's your neighbor's. So also, you can't handle it. It's muktzah. You can't even handle it. Because this object, for you, today, this object has absolutely no use. Something that has no use on Shabbos is muktzah. You can't handle it either. So if your neighbor deposited, again, it has to be, if it's raw meat, it's anyways an issue. Cooked meat, he deposited a nice pot of stew meat. non-kosher stew meat in your fridge, you can't even handle it on Shabbos. Can't move it around. All right. Again, the rule that we're going back and forth in so far is something which has no use on Shabbos. It has some sort of use, you could handle it. It has no use. You cannot handle it. You cannot move it around on Shabbos. Now we're moving to the next category of Muktzah. Noilad. Noilad literally means something which was born. Noilad means something which came into being today, did not exist yesterday. During Shabbos, it came into existence. So just wait for Alan to join. Well, Alan, can you hear us? Not yet. Alan, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, Alan, we're holding chapter 88, halacha 4. Different categories of items which cannot be handled on Shabbos. You start a new category. The new category again is noilad, something which came into existence today. What does that mean? How does something come into existence? Going efer min eish. So huska hayoy ma'idei ein Yehudi. A non-Jew lit a fire. Took some logs, lit up a fireplace, and after the fire burns out, you have ashes there. These ashes did not exist yesterday. Or if you have a chicken and the chicken gave birth to egg on Shabbos, it did not exist yesterday, it exists today. If you have sap running out of the trees during Pesach season in the spring, didn't exist yesterday, exists today. Or other examples of things that fall into this category is something which didn't come into existence today, but it became as a result of a forbidden action. Some action which was forbidden to be done today. For example, you have an apple tree in your backyard, right? They fell off on Shabbos. Apple fell off the tree on Shabbos. Or your neighbor came and said, I picked apple trees from my backyard. So when Shabbos began, that item was forbidden to you. Technically, you couldn't access it. To access it, you would have to pick it from the tree. Now, for some reason or another, it is accessible to you. That's it became into a new category. Or milk that was milk today. Others as examples. Again, it wasn't accessible yesterday. Now it's accessible because a forbidden act was done in between. So Gam Ken and Surim Betultul, these categories are called Noilad. They are something new. They are forbidden to be handled on Shabbos. So if your tree drops fruits, or your neighbor brings over some of his freshly picked fruits, they cannot be eaten on Shabbos. How about bread that was baked by a non-Jew? Non-Jew is a bakery, and he cooked bread in a city which is mainly non-Jews. The mistama adaita the ene Yehudi afa. When the baker baked the bread, he probably baked it for a non-Jew. We had in Minnesota, so my father moved out of Minnesota, but so recently we lived there, and there was a bakery there which was kosher certified, but it was owned by non-Jews. It was open on Shabbos. It was open on Pesach. It was funny, when a Friday on Pesach they would sell challah because it was a Friday item. They didn't know the difference. They're open. They're non-Jewish. The non-Jewish only allowed to be open on Pesach. So in that scenario, St. Paul, Minnesota, it's a kosher bakery. The non-Jews baking bread 7 days a week. And who are they baking bread for? Most of St. Paul, Minnesota is non-Jewish. Most of their customers are probably non-Jewish. But they are baking bread for, they have in mind the non-Jewish people. For them, it's fine. So Muktzah Yisrael Achlab. So if it's a pressing need, we don't have bread for some reason, or it's for a mitzvah purpose, Muktzah Yisrael Achlab Shabbos, a Jew could eat it on Shabbos. So again, when does this become especially? I went some practical examples. Again, if you have a fruit tree in your backyard and fruit falls off of it, or if someone brings you a gift on Shabbos, someone brings you a gift on Shabbos of fruits that were picked that day. You invite your neighbor over for the Shabbos meal. If it's a Jewish person, it gets even more complicated. That's involving Chillul Shabbos. You invite your non-Jewish neighbor over for the Shabbos meal, and he comes over and says, thank you for the invitation. Here's a bag of oranges I just picked from my backyard today. That would fall under the category of noilad, something which came into existence on Shabbos, came into a existence that you could handle, you could deal with on Shabbos, and it's forbidden to handle. Not only can you not eat it, you can't even handle it. It's muktzah. You have to tell him, go put it in the fridge right now. I ain't touching that. Okay, welcome Yehuda, chapter 88, halacha number 5. So now we're discussing muktzah, things which are not allowed to be handled on Shabbos. So far we discussed two categories. Category number 1 was things which have no use on Shabbos. Like we said, raw meat. Raw meat, there's nothing you can do with it on Shabbos. Category number 2 was noilad, something which came into existence today. For example, you burnt wood, since a non-Jew burnt wood and there's ash. That ash was not in existence when Shabbos began. It came into existence on Shabbos. Or something which did exist, but the reason it's accessible to you is because of forbidden action. Like fruit which was on the tree when Shabbos began, but it was picked during Shabbos. So the two categories we learned about till now. Now we're going to learn about chapter 88, halacha 5, the next category of muktzah. Kalim shehem yuchadim lasis behem malacha asura, utensils which are specifically used to do work that is forbidden on Shabbos. Good machteshes v'rechayim v'kurnish v'kardim, a mortar, a mill, a hammer, and an axe. For those 6 days a week, you're using those for forbidden activities, for activities that are forbidden on Shabbos. Umachbedes and brooms, shemachab members of bias that are used for sweeping the house, which in the Kitzur's times was forbidden on Shabbos. We said now they might be different. V'shofar and a shofar, menorah or a candelabra, umachat for toifrim by or needles that are used for sewing, v'neira shleimim or whole candles, ben shel chela, ben shel shayva, whether they're made out of tallow or made out of wax. Upsilas mitzemer geffen and cotton wicks, ubeges shatnez or a garment that has shatnez, that has wool and linen mixed in. Also, the love shade that you're not allowed to wear on Shabbos. All such examples, any example of an item which is during the 6 days of the week are used for, are set aside for forbidden activity. For something which is forbidden on Shabbos, an axe, all these things, a candle, a wick. Could be handled if you're going to use them for something permitted. You're going for example, a hammer. A hammer is generally used for building, right? But on Shabbos, you got stuck with it. You have some nuts, you have no nutcracker. You decide you're going to use your hammer. So the action is permitted. So you're allowed to use a hammer as well. You're allowed to use a hammer for that action. Or an axe to cut food. For some reason, you have no knives in your house. You decide you're cutting food with an axe. That's fine. I wouldn't suggest it. Unless you want to be sent to a psychiatrist. But if Muktzah, not, you're allowed to handle it. You're allowed to do that. Machat shleim little by the kites. Or you can take a needle to remove a splinter. Again, the needle is usually used for sewing. It's a problem. But it's now using it for permitted activity, so that's fine. But however, if the eye or the point of the nail is broken, then it becomes a utensil which has no use at all. It's a useless piece of metal, and you cannot handle it for any reason. So that's again, if you're using a problematic item for a permitted activity, that's fine. Now again, do not confuse this category with the earlier categories we learned. Is a special halacha. This halacha only applies to there's a category called kli shemalachte le'isur, a utensil which is generally used for forbidden activity. A hammer, an axe, a needle, a candle. These type of items, if they fall under this category of kli shemalachte le'isur, then you have the heter. You're allowed to use them for permitted activities. This does not apply to noilad. This does not apply to muktzah, as we learned in halacha 1 and 2. You can also this category. You're allowed to handle them if you need their space. That means you have to use this hammer. If you have a hammer sitting on your dining room chair, or you have a candle sitting on an unlit candle sitting on the dining room chair, you're allowed to move it to sit in the chair. Once you picked it up, since you're allowed to pick it up, or even if you forgot, you picked up the hammer in a way you weren't allowed to. So you had the dining room chair, you picked up the hammer, which is fine. Once you picked it up, you don't have to drop it at the first opportunity. You could put it away in the proper place. However, if you do not need this hammer, we use hammers, the most practical example probably. If you have no need for this hammer, you don't need it for any activity. You don't need the place where it's sitting on. Why? So why are you moving the hammer? Because you have guests around the house, or you have kids around the house, and you don't want them to break your hammer. So you're moving them for their own benefit. They shouldn't get stolen or broken. Or your hammer is sitting on your back porch. You don't want to get stolen. Also, in those scenarios, you're not allowed to handle it. Tefillin are also not allowed to be handled because it's something which can't be used on Shabbos. However, tefillin have more of a leniency. If tefillin are in a place, in an indecent place where they might get dirty, in a dirty place, they can get ruined. You're allowed to handle them and move them to a secure place. Again, let us review. There's this general term we use called Muktzah on Shabbos, things which are forbidden to be handled. That includes a lot of subcategories, and each subcategory has its own set of rules. Subcategory number 1 is halacha number 1 and 2. We learned Muktzah midas, something you set aside not to use on Shabbos. It has no use on Shabbos. Raw meat, right? So, for example, it'll be raw meat. It has no use on Shabbos. Other things we said, twigs, feathers, animals. All these things have no use on Shabbos. That cannot be handled on Shabbos, period. Doesn't matter if you have a raw steak sitting on your chair, or there's no reason. Those cannot be handled. Number 2, unless they have some sort of use on Shabbos, we explained. Number 2 is noilad, something which came into existence on Shabbos or became accessible because of a forbidden act, like fruit that was picked on Shabbos. That is noilad. That also cannot be handled on Shabbos, and there's no way around that. If your non-Jewish neighbor brings over a basket of freshly picked apples, you can't move that. You can't handle it. Sorry, no way around it. The third category is where it starts getting, where it's a bit different. We're talking about utensils which their main use is forbidden activity, like a hammer, a candle. Their main use is for building or for lighting the candle. But you have found a permitted activity. You're using your hammer to break nuts, to crack open nuts. that is fine. Or you're using your hammer, you're moving your hammer because it's on your dining room chair, you need to sit down. That is fine as well. So in this category, this specific category, there are certain scenarios you could use it. We could move it. When can you not move it? If you're moving it for its own purpose, to save it, that shouldn't get stolen, it shouldn't get ruined. That is forbidden. And we'll see we're far from done. There are other categories of muktzah, and we'll see the halacha changes in each of them. All right. Thank you everybody for joining. Have a Gemara Chasima Tova, and see you all next Thursday.
Gemara Chasima Tova.